Chapter 16. Klein ran, slid down the ladder in the alley, ascended up the rappel line, and kneeled next to Jones. Her support station was shut down now, but it had still been humming when the sticky bomb exploded next to her. Hopefully, she had just been knocked unconscious. Klein rolled off her sling pack and rolled Jones onto her back.
"Jones, we got him,"
he told her, looking her over. Her eyelids fluttered and opened slightly, and her cheek was bruised from hitting the wall. But there wasn't much blood. The corners of her mouth drew up slightly.
"Rookie move, standing so close to the wall, fighting another agent,"
she croaked.
"Are the antivirals okay?" "Hold on, Jones,"
Klein said, and rolled her to her side. He pulled off her pack and checked for any blood or broken bones. She groaned, but everything seemed all right. Klein checked her pack. It had looked like she hit the wall pack first, but the antivirals were still intact.
"The antivirals are good. Let's get you out of here." "Klein, I can't see,"
Jones said. Her voice was trembling a little. "I can't see." That was going to be a problem, he thought to himself.
"You've got a concussion. Take it easy. How does your neck feel?"
Klein said. Jones moaned softly.
Can you give me something? My head aches."
Klein fished out some pain pills, but by the time she swallowed, she was losing consciousness again.
Jones, wake up."
Klein shook her a little, tapped her on the cheek with the back of his fingers, but she didn't stir. He pulled off her cap and saw a blood stain on it. He gently probed the side of her head and felt a spot with dried blood. She winced and moaned, half conscious. Klein could guess what had happened. She had been blown across the platform by the sticky bomb, and her head had smacked into the wall. The support station had helped the head wound to stop bleeding quickly, but that made it worse. The side of her head was swollen and was probably still bleeding internally. She would die from internal pressure if she didn't get medical help soon. Somehow, he had to get her down 4 floors, without stairs, across the street, and up to the helipad. The SHT Tech Ascender could barely carry Klein and his guns and gear. He chucked Jones' guns and ammo, and after a moment of hesitation, his own guns and ammo as well. Everything except the sawed-off shotgun. He picked her up, fireman carry, clipped on the rappel line, and descended. It was a hard landing, but ditching the heaviest gear had been the right choice. Klein carried Jones up the scaffolding stairs and laid her next to the helipad. 60 seconds, the helipilot relayed. Klein turned and approached the body of the first hunter, his lip curling in disgust and anger under his mask. He knelt down and pulled the netting and mask off the hunter's head. The mask was ceramic and not as heavy as it looked. A black balaclava covered most of the face and head of the man underneath, and Klein pulled that off as well. The man looked to be in his late 40s, early 50s, with gray hair, a trimmed beard, and some wrinkles, but in good health. There was something strange about him, but Klein couldn't put his finger on it. He pulled out his phone and took a picture. 30 seconds, the pilot said. Klein stood and went to the second hunter. He pulled off the solid black mask and balaclava and found a younger man, late 30s, early 40s, graying hair at his temples, but clean shaven. Again, he had the same sense that something wasn't right, without being able to verbalize what it was. He took another picture. Klein searched the hunter's gear, but could find no ISIC device like his own. Instead, he found a cylindrical device that said Z-Tech Systems on the side that looked promising. On impulse, he pulled out his knife and cut it off the hunter's vest. He could hear the whumping rotors of the helo approaching and looked up and saw a white cone of light swooping down from the east. He looked at the cylinder, wondering what secrets might be discovered inside, and back at the man under the mask. How many agents had he killed, and why?
I'm putting down now,
the pilot announced, and the helicopter swayed and yawed as it descended to the ground. While it was coming down, Klein picked up Jones. When it had settled, the door slid open and Klein laid Jones over the back-facing seats, then sat down across from her, strapped himself in, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. The pilot turned and looked over his shoulder back at Klein. Klein did a thumbs-up gesture and jabbed his thumb up in the air a few times to signify, "Let's go."
Or RTB,
the pilot said over the radio. All the pilots knew the dangers of the dark zone and didn't linger any longer than they needed to in here. As they banked and gained speed, Klein began to relax. Despite everything that had gone wrong, they were on their way back with the antivirals. He let out a long sigh. Suddenly, it had occurred to him what had been strange about the hunters. They were not wearing virus filters, he thought to himself. Under their ballistic masks and balaclavas, he hadn't seen filters, fans, nothing. In the dark zone, not wearing a mask was suicide. Did they already have the dollar flu? Did they want to get it? That was ridiculous. They were the best geared hostiles he had encountered. Why wouldn't they have filters under their masks? There wasn't much room for filters in there, but they could have customized something, surely, he thought to himself. Maybe that's why they attacked when we extracted. They wanted the antivirals, Klein thought. But he rejected this too. They had attacked when McPherson had signaled extraction and he didn't have any antivirals. Klein just knew that as soon as they entered the dark zone, these hunters had been watching. They would have known that McPherson had no antivirals, but they attacked anyway. So, why? They already had the antivirals. They didn't need filters. This answer popped into Klein's head as the helo was leaving the dark zone. As tired as he was, this thought shocked him. He sat up, considering this. With all the gear and SHD tech and everything they had, was it so far-fetched to think that they already had the antivirals, or even something more advanced? The military had pulled out. The doctors and scientists had made lots of the experimental antivirals. He had just recovered one container they had left behind in the rush to evacuate. The antivirals could have already been perfected elsewhere over the past months. But this still left the most maddening question unanswered. Why kill agents? If they wanted power, they didn't need to kill anyone. They could have just started distributing their cure and the division would have lined up with everyone else for it. Or was that naive? Wouldn't they be ordered to commandeer the cure from them for the sake of the national security or some such? Could someone have hacked their SHD tech? Why would these operatives want to kill SHD agents and only SHD agents? There weren't any Rikers, Cleaners, or LMB troops bleeding out with axes left in them. Every gruesome corpse had been an SHD agent. As Klein watched the dark shapes of the buildings passing by, he continued to contemplate. These hunters had training, possibly even SHD training. Could they be first-wave rogue agents? It was hard to believe, but it was the most plausible idea so far. If they had been first wave, they might have had time and opportunity to get all the gear they had. It might even be some perverse explanation for why they were killing all these agents that were coming in after them. They had been far too successful today. Wait, Had all those bodies been from today? Lau had insisted that they all get dressed up like lab techs before they got on the choppers. Surely not all of those agents had crashed and found clothes to change into like he had. So who were the agents he had found? The ones unfortunate enough to be in the dark zone when these hunters had decided it was open season. "You've already figured it out. You're just not willing to face it yet," Mirror Man whispered to him. There was something he was missing, a piece of the puzzle that could tie everything together. But every moment he sat there, he sank deeper into exhaustion, despite the shocking revelations. As the helo made the final run towards the Farley post office, Klein saw the sky brightening in the east. Dawn was coming. Chapter 17. The evacuation helicopter landed on the roof of the Boo. Jones was pulled out unconscious. Klein felt awful. His head was pounding. He felt hot and exhausted. He staggered out of the helo, unsteady on his feet.
Get this guy on a gurney,
one of the medical personnel ordered, pointing to Klein. Klein allowed himself to be picked up and laid down, and wheeled into the freight elevator with Jones. As the freight elevator descended, Klein looked around, frowning.
Get Candle. And give me that,
he said with a cough, pointing at his sling pack. The EMT, looking over Klein, slid his pack into his hand. She saw that his face was pale and sweaty. "Hey, let's put an IV in you," she offered.
"Not until I talk to Candle,"
Klein growled, clutching his bag and shaking his head slightly. The EMT shrugged with an "it's your funeral" expression.
"How is she?"
he asked the gray-haired EMT looking over Jones. "Bad bump to the head. Unresponsive, but her pulse is strong. She'll live," the EMT said, keeping his attention on her, not looking at Klein. The elevator reached the main floor and they wheeled both of them towards the medical wing. They were wheeled in through the back entrance to the intensive care area. Candle ran in, and Fei Lau hobbled in with her crutch a few seconds later. Klein was already unzipping his bag. He pulled out the white canister and held it up with a shaky hand. Candle's usually brooding face lit up as she instantly recognized the shape and purpose of the canister. "We got it," Klein said simply, and held out the thick canister to Candle. She slowly reached out and took it from him gently, holding it reverently with both hands. "Oh my God! Thank you! Thank you, Agent Klein!" he said, and broke into a coughing fit. Candle frowned and held the back of her fingers on his cheeks and then his forehead. "You're burning up with fever. Ross, get this agent checked out," she called out to one of the staff. Klein reached out and squeezed her forearm. "Doc, please," Klein whispered. "You don't know what we had to go through to get that." Candle looked at him steadily and nodded. "Agent Klein, you don't know how much this is going to speed up our research." She smiled, and her face crumpled a little, something Klein was not expecting. Candle closed her eyes and sighed. Then her eyes opened and she smiled, looking at the canister and at Klein. She nodded. "You did good, Klein. Thank you. Again. Rest now. Doctor's orders." Then she turned and left, cradling the antivirals. Lau stepped closer, beaming. "Job well done, Agent. You look like hammered shit, but we'll get you fixed up," she said, patting his shoulder. Klein smirked wryly. "You should see the other guy. Just give me some penicillin and a week off," he said, laying his head down. Lau chuckled and stepped back to let the nurse administer to Klein. "What did you see in there?" she asked. Klein gestured to Lau to come closer and she leaned in. "You need to debrief me," Some things happened in there tonight. Klein paused and refocused. Wait. Has anyone else made it back? Klein said. Lau swallowed hard and looked at the floor. She just shook her head. Klein set his jaw and pressed his lips together. Klein, rest now. We can debrief when you're not half dead, Lau told him and patted his shoulder again. The medics fussed over Klein for at least half an hour before they left him alone, and he fell into a deep sleep. Candle had been woken from a deep slumber, but made sure the antivirals were secured and guarded before she went to her quarters and started getting ready for the day. Fei Lau limped back to her desk and went down the list of agents, crossing off the other ones that had been assigned to this mission. She wondered how she could have done things differently, and what Klein would tell her about his night in the dark zone with Jones. Lau had barely slept. They had gotten the reports. The blizzard had come early, and they lost 6 choppers and a lot of agents. The few that had survived had done the smart thing and hunkered down for the storm. Rhodes had torn the weather ops guy a new one, but she had spent the night worrying whether they should send another squad in for the antivirals or not. Getting the antivirals was a huge win, but they had paid a huge price. Klein didn't know the half of it. His helicopter wasn't the only one that had crashed. Plus, there had been a previous failed mission that she kept quiet. Lau decided to skip the exercise and physical therapy today. She hadn't gotten much sleep and just wanted to get some chow and get to work. Now that they had the antivirals, there was a new spark of hope inside her. She ventured over to the cantina for some breakfast. Oatmeal and canned ham was on the menu for today. Someone even scrounged up some brown sugar. Today was going to be a better day than the last few days, by miles. After eating quickly, Lau went to her desk and started figuring out the priorities for today. Now that the boo was relatively secure, they needed to start reaching out to the rest of Midtown and getting survivors back on their feet. They were still cut off, and with their current manpower, it would take years to clear the bridges and tunnels, so they had to prioritize establishing settlements with farming and infrastructure for survival, until transit and shipping routes were open again. After spending a couple of hours working out a plan to begin educating the survivors, Lau got up to take a break. She decided to check on Klein and Jones. Lau went through the medical wing and saw Candle was already yelling at her staff. Kids were awake and playing. A couple of folks were getting counseling. And finally, she made it to the intensive care room. Jones was stable, but in a coma. Klein was not in his bed. His gear and clothes were gone as well. "Where's Klein?" Lau asked, an edge in her voice. The nurse looked up and rolled his eyes. "He wouldn't stay. I told him he had to rest, and he insisted that he would rest better in his own bunk, so..." And he shrugged. Lau limped over towards the barracks, but Klein wasn't there either. She had an ominous feeling about this. Klein had been exhausted and nearly dead. Where the hell was he? Faye opened her Isaac map. She saw lots of little circles with agents' names that would show up when she focused on them, but didn't see one with Klein's name. She raised her watch to her mouth and said, "Isaac, find Agent Klein." A blip showed up on her holomap. It was outside of the boo, but not far, just across the street near Madison Square Gardens. He shouldn't be out of bed, let alone outside the base, Lau thought to herself. "Isaac, Lau to Klein, come back." Lau spoke to her watch. "No response from Agent Klein," Isaac chirped. Lau rapped on the wall behind her with her knuckles. "Benitez, can someone pull security footage for the last 3 hours? Klein left intensive care. I'm trying to figure out why." She spoke loudly. She hadn't heard from him or spoken to him this morning, but Lau knew Benitez would be at his post by now. "All right, we're on it." Benitez gruffed in equal volume from the other side of the partition. He banged on the metal file cabinet behind him.
Hey, Frank, come over here. I need you to pull some security footage.
30 minutes later, Benitez came over and pointed at Lau's monitor.
Something's hinky. Take a look.
Frank was setting a video feed to the monitor, and it was from a security camera up in the corner of the intensive care room, showing sped-up footage. There were just 4 beds: Klein, Jones, a burn victim, and a woman with some gunshot wounds. Klein and Jones had been extracted at about 7:30 a.m., and he was asleep by 8:30 a.m. He laid still during a time-lapse fast-forward of the hours. Klein suddenly sat up in his bed a little after 10 a.m., hastily collected his things, and left the room. The footage was chopped together from various cameras around the base now. Klein went up to the tech wing, into the back where the heating, power generators, and water purification units were. There were cameras watching the facilities, but not on the field equipment area above where he seemed to have gone to. 10 minutes later, he came out, went down the stairs, then sat and ate some breakfast at one of the tables in the atrium of the post office. Sitting here, he could see Lau's desk. When she got up to use the bathroom, he got up, leaving his breakfast, and walked out the front door. There were external cameras, but it would take more time to pull that footage, and the bottom line was that Klein had left. But why wait until Lau wasn't there? Right then, the radio on her desk crackled.
Klein to the pirate of the post office, come back.
Since losing her eye and nearly losing her leg, Lau had been nicknamed a pirate. It was Klein's voice, and it sounded friendly enough, but this was damn strange. Lau and Benitez looked at each other, and she picked up her radio. "This is Lau. Klein, what the hell? You should be in bed." Klein coughed.
Yeah, I'll lay down again soon. I just had to get outside for a little while. Listen, why don't you come out here and join me? We can debrief here.
Benitez frowned. Even though the streets around the Boo were mostly secure, it wasn't a great place for a cripple and a sick person to sit down for a chat. Lau shrugged. "All right, but why don't we do it in here where it's warm?"
The sun's out today. It's not bad. Just wear your coat. You'll be fine. Klein out.
Lau looked at Benitez. Something was off.
He's acting weird. I'm coming with you,
Benitez said. Lau shook her head. "No, you stay here. I don't know what he's on about, but he's no threat in his current condition. Send Frank with me," Lau said. Benitez tilted his head and scratched his stubble.
"All right. Keep an eye out, yeah? Let me know what this is about after."
Faye nodded, and Benitez told Frank to go with her, and went back to his desk. Frank helped her limp down the ramp going down to the street, and took point, keeping a lookout for any hostiles. But the streets were clear. Lau breathed in the chilly air, felt the sun on her skin, and wanted to smile. But she was focused on Klein and all the other responsibilities on her day. There was a Quonset tent at the northeast corner of Madison Square Garden, just down the block. It had been a hub for screening civilians and sending them where they needed to go for medical or supply needs, or to try to reach loved ones around Manhattan. There were tables and chairs and radios. Frank poked his head in and found Klein, then escorted Lau inside. Klein looked sick and miserable, his eyelids and nose red and shiny, and his face showing a lack of energy.
"Hey, Lau. Hey, Frank."
Sitting on the table to his side was his tack vest, sling pack, and ISIC unit. He was wearing his holster and other gear. Frank and Lau looked around the tent, making sure there was nothing to be concerned about.
"It's all right. I'm the only one here. Take it easy. Have a seat," he said,
pointing to the chair across from him. After the brief walk, Lau's bad leg was aching, and Klein wasn't acting crazy, so she went ahead and sat. Klein gave a low-energy smile. but didn't say anything. His eyes glanced at Frank and back to her. Lau understood the body language and began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. He doesn't want to talk in front of Frank. In fact, he didn't want to talk in the booth. That's why he's out here, she thought to herself. Frank, why don't you go scout around outside? We'll be fine in here for a few minutes. Frank sniffed and left the tent. And Klein relaxed.
Thank you for that,
he said. He leaned forward on his elbows and laced his fingers together.
I know why you sent us into the DZ in hazmat suits.
Lau's blood ran cold, and she went still. Klein's hands gripped each other so tightly that his knuckles were white.
I was furious for a hot minute, but I get it now. You find the antivirals and then all the agents you sent in to get them kept dying, yeah?
Lau swallowed and nodded. She felt a stab of fear. Klein was correct, and he didn't seem to be acting crazy. But how did he know this? Klein took a long breath.
You didn't want to send more agents to their death, but we needed those antivirals. You didn't know if there was a leak or who was untrustworthy, and you didn't want to spook whoever was going in, so you couldn't tell everyone what was happening. But maybe if the agents going in didn't look like agents, they might be okay this time, yeah?
Klein reasoned matter-of-factly. Lau looked down, feeling emotion welling up. Klein had figured it out. She didn't know all the agents in Manhattan, but she had felt a keen sense of responsibility for them. It was one of the toughest calls I've made so far, she admitted with a tremble in her voice. She leaned forward and rested her arms on the table. But if I had to make that call again, I would. The fate of millions outweighs the... Klein raised his hand.
You don't have to sell me on it, I get it. And I probably would have made the same call. I get it,
he repeated. He sighed and leaned back in his seat.
But I don't have to like it. Not when it was my life on the table.
Lau grimaced. Those words stung. But this had gone on long enough. Klein, what's going on here? I need to know. Klein opened his mouth and paused before he spoke, thinking for a moment.
The bottom line is that there's some new players in the DZ.
Lau frowned. New? What's that mean? Klein studied her face.
I'll tell you what I know and what I suspect, he said, shifting in his seat. These guys were hunting agents. The ones you sent in before, they butchered them.
Lau's face went pale. What?
Klein nodded and looked down. There should be some pics and video on my ISIC. Some were killed and left in front of entrances into the DZ with axes in their chests and their hands cut off.
Lau's eyes opened wider. Klein swallowed before he continued.
They took their smartwatches as trophies. No Rikers, cleaners, or L&B killed like this. Only agents.
Oh my God, Lau gasped quietly. What are they?
They hunt agents. They're armored, geared to the max and high threat. They wear ballistic masks. I think they have SHD training. They move like us.
Klein slid his tac vest and ISIC unit towards Lau.
And they have SHD tech.
Lau rubbed her eyes. This was a little much to take in. SHD tech? I don't understand. They're not rogue agents? Lau said. Klein looked at Lau and shook his head slowly.
When you see them, you'll understand. These guys are something different.
Lau sighed with frustration. Do you have any idea why they're doing this? Lau said.
The brutality makes it feel like they've got beef, Klein said with a sigh. I have a suspicion, but it's not good. This is the part I didn't want Frank to hear. Lau nodded. Okay, I've come this far, tell me. Klein laid one of his hands on the table, palm open. I looked at one of the hunters before we extracted, saw their faces. They didn't have virus filters. I'm positive they were in the DZ for longer than I was. No filters. The only thing that makes sense to me is that they already had antivirals, or even a vaccine, Klein reasoned. Lau frowned. How? She asked, incredulous. The antivirals we got last night, that was just what was left after they bugged out in a big-ass hurry. But someone has had some of those samples for at least 2 months. And I think they've got some kind of cure already. But more than that, Lau, I think the hunters are part of the division. Lau scoffed. Whoa. Before Lau could continue, Klein held up a Z-Tech Systems canister covered in fine fabric. They didn't have ISIC bricks, but they had these. They moved like us, cover to cover, quick, maneuverable. They used SHD tech like pros. Those axes definitely aren't in our handbook. Look, Occam's razor. The easiest explanation is that they are somehow part of us, part of the division, Klein said. Lau frowned and leaned away from Klein. She didn't like any part of this. Klein held up his hands. Just for a minute, pretend this is true. Why might there be a secret division within the division, like this? And why were they only killing agents? Can you think of a reason? Klein paused. Because I can. Whose picture is pinned on your cubicle wall? He asked. Lau knew he was talking about the fuzzy pictures of Aaron Keener. Keener was one of the agents in the first wave that had been activated to respond to the crisis. When the higher-ups had decided to pull the military out of the decontamination zone and not give more aid, Keener had lost people. He had turned against all of them at that point, vowing to burn the whole system down. He was the one that had helped Bliss blow up the aircraft that had the SHD commander on board, the same explosion that had almost killed Lau. Faye's thoughts were racing. The only thing she had known a few minutes ago was that none of the agents sent in for the antivirals a couple of days ago had returned. Well, that wasn't entirely true. An agent had gotten pictures of a couple of the agents' bodies, but at the time she had thought the blood was from some sadistic Riker torture. She had to conceive that this new information gave a bit of credence to what Klein was saying. But extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. Now she was being told that there was an almost unimaginable threat out there, aimed at the division. To contemplate that these hunters were also a part of the division, a secret compartmentalized department within SHD, secret from the rest of them? This was just crazy. But Klein was still going. There was always going to be someone in the division that was going to go rogue. Division agents have a get-out-of-jail-free card. We can do whatever we want as long as we're getting the job done. We've got powerful tech to help us do it. Our authority comes directly from the president. There has to be something in place to check that power, to stop it when it got out of control, Klein continued. Okay, I'll give you that. But what you're suggesting is nuts. We could just turn off their access to ISIC, and they would be on their own. That they would send in secret commandos to take out rogue agents it's exactly the kind of thinking that permeates the Pentagon and DC. And you know that ISIC is not that hard to hack, Klein interrupted abruptly. Lau paused, looking at him. She wanted to believe that this was the trauma of his ordeal talking, that these were crazed ramblings. But as haggard as he looked, Klein was relaxed, calm, not manic. Okay, wait. Did you and Jones go rogue at some point? Is that why they attacked? Lau reasoned. Klein shook his head. No. Maybe they're trying to keep us from getting the antivirals. Maybe after Keener, they can't even tell who's rogue and who's not at this point. I don't know. But what I do know is that the hunters wear masks. If I'm right, then they're among us, and they're watching, Klein said.
Lau frowned. Watching for what?
Klein shrugged. I don't know. But no one's gonna like this. I feel like all the agents deserve to know. But at the same time, I feel like he can't risk the mass exodus that might happen if they do, Klein reasoned.
Lau rolled her eye and sighed. Okay. One thing at a time. I need to confirm a hell of a lot of details before we can conclude that this is even remotely correct, Lau reasoned.
But you know what makes a lot of sense, Klein said. Look, I need some time to recover and I don't know. I think I've earned a little time off, Klein said, pleading.
Lau raised her eyes. Wait. Klein lifted a hand, palm open towards her.
That's my Isaac right there, he said, pointing at the unit on his tack vest. I'm leaving it with you. I'm not going rogue. I just need some time to think about this. No more than my family.
Lau didn't say a word. She needed all of her agents out there in the field, but Klein wouldn't be ready for duty in a couple of days anyway, so there was that. And his theory about these hunters was explosive, and it was good he understood this. Maybe it was better that he wasn't in the boo, rubbing shoulders with the other agents.
I'll get you more proof in time, Klein said, standing.
He held his hand out to her. She shook his hand. You're a good agent, Klein. What you did last night was incredible, Lau said gratefully.
Klein scoffed. Incredibly crazy, maybe. Keep doing what you're doing, Lau. Maybe we'll actually come out of this all right someday.
Klein turned and walked away, but not going towards the boo. You're not healing up at the boo? Lau called after him.
Klein turned back. I got a dose of penicillin. If I need to come back, I will. But right now, I just don't feel safe in there,
Klein said, trailing off. Lau grimaced and waved. Klein waved and walked out, going down the block. Without his Isaac, Lau wouldn't know where he was, but neither would any hunters. Faye blew out her cheeks and looked around. She called Frank, and he escorted her back to base. It was a lot to take in. She hoped Jones would wake up soon so she could ask her some questions. But for now, life in Manhattan would continue, limping along just like her. Lau made it inside and thanked Frank. She watched the people in lines, the staff bustling back and forth. Most people were just concerned with surviving day to day and had no idea of the larger threats lurking in the shadows. It was better that way. Better for the ones who were trained and hardened to deal with the darkness. Lau needed to think about how much of this she would tell Benitez, and she needed something to drink. She hobbled to the west side of the foyer, where she heard her sister playing guitar and Candle's ex Alexis Kwan playing piano, doing a Christmas music medley together and bringing some brightness to the cold winter day. There was a little girl, maybe 8 to 10 years old, eating at one of the tables together with her mother. She remembered them because there was intel that the father of the girl, husband to the mother, was running with the cleaners, and the mother was considered a security threat. But there weren't any indications that they had been in contact anytime recently. The little girl was protesting something intensely to her mother. Mommy, it is the same one. I made it myself, remember? He was here. I know he was. He's coming back soon. The little girl was patting and petting something on the table near her plate. Lau paused and looked. It was a pom-pom beanie, laid out flat on its side. Blue, red, white, and green, with Best Daddy embroidered across the front. Faye remembered that Klein had been wearing it when they brought him in. "But where did you find it, sweetie?" the mother asked. "I told you it was on my blankets when I woke up. Daddy came by in the night when we were sleeping," the girl said breathlessly, picking up the hat and holding it close, looking around at all the people, probably thinking that her father was going to walk in at any moment. The mother seemed confused, but smiled nonetheless, and they kept eating. Faye could guess why Klein had been wearing that hat. She felt a flood of pity for the little girl, that her father would not be coming back soon. She wasn't sure how Klein had figured out that they were here, or where they were sleeping, but she wouldn't be the one to break that little girl's heart. She would let her keep hoping. Because it's not enough to just survive. There has to be a reason to survive, to hope for a better tomorrow. And if a little girl could keep her hope alive a little longer, maybe Lau could too.
Lady Geeks and Gamermen, thank you for listening to my survival fanfiction. This is Matt Shields, Splinter Shield, the Hunter himself. I've been in the Division community since the beginning. Years ago, I spent months working on my Hunter cosplay, partially as a love letter to the devs at Massive Entertainment for bringing me out to Sweden in December of 2015. It was a life-changing experience and something I'll never forget. As I worked on that costume, I thought a lot about the Hunters and what they might be, how they fit into the bigger picture, and why Faye Lau would have us stripped down before going into the DZ for this mission. I hope that you enjoyed this story and my explanations for what happens in survival. I decided to write this story as a love letter to the Division community. I've made friends all over the world through this game. It was generous members of the community that donated money to me so that I could make the Bailau cosplay for Hamish and build a new gaming PC after we did the survival tournaments. I want to thank the developers at Massive for the time and passion they put into this game and this game mode specifically. I want to thank the Division community for your passion and the encouragement I was given to make an audio version of this story. But it would be a huge and shameful omission if I didn't give a very big thank you to another member of our community who read Beyond Survival years ago and believed in the story enough to lend his talents and voice to this project. Mark, without you, this would not have been possible. We started working on this before the announcement of the Survivors game this year, but since the announcement, I'm even happier and prouder about what we've created. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And until next time, what are you hunting for?